Okay, Ira, it's a sunny day out. I hope you brought the plans because I brought you a shovel, so get digging. It's manual labor time.
Okay, yeah, I put the plans right here in this big cozy pocket in the front of my big cute rabbit overalls. So if we just take a look, it's pretty clear. We're just going to need a couple spots, one bathroom disco and a little kitchen and a place for a bunk bed, and we should be all set. So, okay, here I go. I'm digging a bungalow, right?
Pretty standard underground bungalow plans, I think. This is a prefab job, so this should be pretty easy. Let me know, while you're doing that, while you're down there in that hole, if you come across any cute little animals.
Oh, yeah, you can hear me, right? There's a whole bunch of adorable animals I'm running into. They seem to be vessels for ideas and,
This is perfect. This is exactly what I was hoping to happen. I would love to take this opportunity to mine the rich vein of animal stories.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have a great resource here.
Yeah, you think they're on board? Would they come up and want to kind of tell us, what tropes they embody, if they have any morals for us, ways that we should live our lives?
Yeah,
motherly rules to follow.
Yeah, I put them all in this big sack, so we'll just dump them out on the table and look through them. But before we get into that, let's say hi to the people. So welcome to today's episode, everybody. I'm Ira Marcks. I write and draw comics.
And I'm Cadieux, an animator, an illustrator, and an animal enthusiast.
Yeah, we're just very enthusiastic about animals. And today we are talking about Pixar's Sparks short, Burrow.
Yeah, we're going to unpack a little bit of Burrow. We're going to dig into, as we said before, the rich soil of animal stories, formative for us throughout history. And we're going to hit the water table of that good storytelling juice. So,
welcome to our cute and cuddly cartoon feelings. This week feels relaxing.
Does it?
Well, we just picked two of our almost all-time favorite movies the last 2 weeks, right? We did Spider-Verse and then Rats of Nim, and those are just monsters for us, I think. So this one feels like a walk in the park.
Yeah, this is a little brain vacation.
Yeah, it's shorts.
Taking
it's
a little
about
time
short
off.
characters and it's short length, 6 minutes. That's the right amount of time for a movie, I feel.
Yeah, that's beginning, middle, end, emotions, feelings, credits, done.
So before we get into the movie we're talking about today, there's the umbrella over this movie of the Pixar Sparks Shorts program.
That's true. Tell me more.
Actually, that's all I know is that it's called Sparks Shorts. I believe it. Do you know when they started it? A couple years ago.
It's, a couple years old. It doesn't, I want to say 2019.
Yeah, pretty new. It's 2021 right now. Happy New Year, everybody.
You did it. Still alive, baby.
But so it's a couple years old, and it seems to be, not to get into this, but I feel like it's a bit of a post hashtag Me Too incentive or initiative at Pixar to be like, look, we got all these white guys, and some of them are doing a fine job, but we got to bring some new voices into the mix here. And this is like the incubator for that kind of, right?
100%. And actually, well, I have a little bit, I almost want to talk a little bit about this. I guess I don't have anything planned, so we'll see where this goes. But something that's interesting to me that we reflected on a little bit in past episodes, even a little bit in the Nim episode with Don Bluth leaving Disney. And there was this certain period of the Walt Disney Animation Studios history that was like, people are frustrated. The young up-and-comers feel like they're running up against a wall of no more innovation, and they want to push and da-da-da-da-da. And they felt like the old guard. I think some of the 9 old men who are still around, a lot of the older animators weren't really ready to let them have that moment. I think even John Lasseter had that specific sort of, people regarded him as kind of an upstart, and he ended up getting fired by Disney because of that. It was like, you know, he like won a student Oscar and like wanted to like do all this stuff, and people weren't ready to let him have it.
Right.
And it was like kind of a rejection of cultivating new talent. So this is something interesting because I hadn't thought about it for the longest time. It was like Pixar is this brain trust. It's these guys. They're sitting around the, you know, coffee table. They're coming up with Wall-E and Finding Nemo and all these stories. And you're just like, yeah, this is Pixar. You know, but here we are years later thinking, okay, but actually what is next? And who is going to be the next generation? And in a way, I mean, I do think this was prompted by a lot, you know, all that John Lasseter stuff and, you know, a lot of stuff coming out about the environment at Pixar. But it's great to see it because, I mean, even aside from that, specifically trying to cultivate new talent, you have to do it. Get a jump on it. Don't let it come kind of bite you in the ass, you know, decades later.
Don't let it get stale. And at the time of recording, I believe it was like just last week that Pete Docter said he was stepping out of the director role and moving on to, I don't know, some other position. So he's still around, but he doesn't want to be the stamp of Pixar anymore. And it'll be interesting to see how they escape that and move on from it, because that's like what we expect. But I think he pulled that move at the right time. And I know we're trying to talk about shorts here today, but I think that's actually a big part of this moment and why these shorts are exciting, because they're just a totally fresh look at how to use the Pixar resource.
Yeah, well, and I just want to say too, I felt like we maybe invoked that partially when we were like, oh, peak Doctor for Soul.
Oh, totally.
But it's cool in hindsight just because I guess that's what he was thinking, you know? If he was like, he made this and he was like, I'm ready to kind of move on and foster that next generation. That's interesting. It's an interesting choice, and I'm excited to see where Pixar goes.
Yeah, well, definitely. Yeah, I definitely can't wait to like see some of this next era of full-length feature. But let's get back to the shorts conversation. So shorts in general, shorts are a big part of my life. I had a lot of VHS tapes growing up with all kinds of random weird animated shorts on them. So I think that was my initial like falling in love with cartooning and animation, was just seeing the variety of animation styles that were out there. And you'd see it through like music videos or just, I don't know, early features from the 30s of like Fleischer Studios and early Disney stuff.
I'm trying to think now of like what my first experiences with shorts are. Because when I think about short content, honestly, and I love animated shorts, but really just short content in general, I really like I love reading, even more as I get older, I love reading collections of short stories by authors I really like. Like a friend of mine gifted me a copy of Exhalation by, Ted Chiang.
The Three-Body Problem.
It is, which I haven't read, but yeah. So she gifted me this copy of Exhalation by Ted Chiang, which is his latest collection of science fiction short stories. And it's just, I mean, he's a special favorite of mine when it comes to short stories, but like, it's just unreal what you can do with not very much. You know, some of those stories are really short, and then obviously some of them are longer, but it's amazing. It's just like this perfect little like fine-tuned machine of like making these like elegant stories that I always found appealing about short form storytelling.
Yeah, they feel more like a song structure. Like you're saying, they're kind of clockwork, like I don't know, you could take like a bluegrass song and it's just got all these perfect little components that fit in this small window of time and they all play their role. I feel like the animation vibe for a short is a lot more like that. You're not bogged down by character arcs as much. You can kind of focus on a moral, or you could just do a little vignette of a character, like a moment in time type of thing. So there's like a couple different styles of shorts. But overall, they just feel very experimental and sometimes bittersweet, because if you fall in love with one, like, for example, we all know, by we all, I mean me, because I'm the other person here. We all know that you love the Pixar Sparks short.
Kitbull.
Kitbull, yeah.
Oh, mess me up.
And it's like, are you ever going to see those characters again? I don't know. It's kind of sad. Maybe not.
When it's so funny because I just watched it before. I watched a bunch of these, in prep for this episode. And some of them I hadn't seen before, but Kitbull I've watched, I don't know how many times, a handful of times at least. And I literally do cry every single time. Yeah. I don't know. I'm a sensitive soul, but it just gets me every freaking time. But I did think I could conceive of a cool story, kind of like an adventure story sort of that takes place after the events of the short Kitbull, where, in a nutshell, it's this little kitty and a big dog and they end up getting a family and like being happy and finally treated with respect like they deserve. And it's great. And I could totally envision a great story, a continuation of that, but it also doesn't need it. And it's what's nice, I guess, maybe the highest compliment I could give it is that I can envision that. But you don't have to have it. You don't need to make a feature film with these characters, but I felt so attached to them based on this one little short piece where they just felt real. And I was like, well, I have to save them. Like, I have to protect these, they don't deserve what's happening. And I don't know. I thought it was so wonderful. And also, anytime Pixar does 2D or even like pretends to do 2D, which will come up in this episode, I am just so ready for it. I'm so here for that.
Yeah, it's great to just watch. Well, I don't know. I kind of went on this weird rant with the Soul episode of kind of the role of cubism in the kind of aesthetic of that movie. And the shorts, the Sparks shorts is that times a million, because each one of these just feels like a different dip into another time and place in the universe of animation. Like production wise, narrative wise, like character, style. Like all these different pieces come together to, and they're just picking and choosing from all these different eras. Yeah.
I want to say, I mean, doesn't have a greater point except that just like what a cool opportunity. Because the conception of Spark Shorts is you basically get a small budget, and I think it's like a 6-month time period, if you're part of this program, and then you get to take that small budget, you take your timeline and you make your thing and it's done. And I'm just like, for any filmmaker or aspiring filmmaker, that rules. The production quality is really good on these, and yeah, you can tell that they're pushing the visual style on different ones. Some of them are really just kind of standard 3D like Pixar-esque house style kind of a look, and then some of them are like, this is 2D, or it's like really painterly, and it's just so cool, and that's so fun. I don't know, just like what an awesome kind of situation to play. And then, you can tell any kind of story. You can get weird. Like one thing I used to really like to do when I was pretending that I was going to go to art school and be a 3D animator, lying to myself about it. I used to watch all the student shorts from those colleges, and it was really cool.
Oh, that's a good idea. Just get a sense of what comes out of the production line there.
And I just loved it. Some of it too, I'm just like, let me just marinate in this because it's what I want, at the time, and I'm just absorbing it. Some of those too, I still vividly recall. I've seen amazing student shorts, and some of the Pixar Spark shorts have that feeling, and I don't mean that in any kind of denigrating way to say this feels like a student film. It just has that, let's just make this and see how it is. And they're usually good when that happens, right? And like, we'll just make it with this style, and we're going to tell this story, and we're going to, and then when it's done, it's done.
Yeah, they all have different agendas too. And they are, like, the nice thing about all shorts is they're usually a pretty pure product of the director's voice. There's not a lot of compromise. There's only the refinement of their idea, right? And especially if you only have 6 months to do it, you're kind of cutting out a lot of opportunity to indulge or, like bring new ideas into the mix or like revise.
Right.
You just kind of have to be a little pure with it just because it's this great restriction. Money doesn't seem to be the issue at all. That's kind of like the cool thing with these, but it is really just time.
That is big. I do wonder, I don't know. I don't know that much about the inner workings of the Spark Shorts program. I'm definitely curious, like how much active coaching there is or active kind of molding of the talent. I guess if you know about that, email us, because I know, but I am curious. I'm curious, how much Pixar is like guiding the process. Because a lot of the shorts that have come out of Spark Shorts are weird. I mean, they all sort of have a Pixar-y flavor, I guess. It's hard to really know that for sure. To me, it's like, yeah, they feel Pixar-y, but would I be able to tell without the branding at the top? Like, would I have known that? Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to know. Right. Like, what's the rule? They're character driven. They're usually kind of sweet.
But even like Burrow, to bring it to Burrow doesn't feel that Pixar-y to me. Something in the way that the story is, I guess it has a little bit of that, but even just like the visual style really evokes European animation to me. And there's specifically a studio, or I don't really know if it's a studio, but like a French movie called Ernest and Celestine about a bear and a mouse. It's really cute, and it's kind of done in this sketchy watercolory aesthetic that a Burrow is done in, and I don't know, it feels like a weird choice for Pixar in a way that I'm very pleased with.
Yeah.
I like that a lot, but that's cool to see. That's not something that so I think if I sat down and was just watching Burrow, I would never have guessed like, oh, this is a Pixar thing.
No, totally. Okay, well, let's kind of get into our reactions to this little short. So this is Burrow from 2020, directed by Madeline Sharafian. We'll say, sorry, Madeline, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right. So the tagline for this 6-minute movie is, "Home is where the hair is." Hair spelled H-A-R-E, in case you missed that.
Wink.
And a quick synopsis of the short. The film follows a young rabbit as she tries to build the burrow of her dreams, becoming embarrassed each time she accidentally digs into a neighbor's home. All right. So you were kind of digging into the look. Okay, there's just going to be a lot of rabbit.
I'm burrowing into the look here.
It's going to be inevitable. This is just what's going to happen. But,
trying to chase the carrot to get to the bottom of what this short is all about.
Yeah, let's chase it into the look of this movie. So it kind of recalls, and we'll get into this a bit more in depth later, children's book illustration in a lot of ways to me. Just the textures of it, first of all. Yeah,
and this is not this is still a visual note, kind of, but the aesthetic of the burrows itself. So there's a lot of shots in Burrow where you're kind of getting that, like, the camera is zoomed back and we can see underground. It's like a 2D depiction of underground, and there's little pods connected by the tunnels, and those are where the animals live. So you're getting these, like, I don't know how to, like, a macro view, but no, that's wrong. Like a micro view? You're getting a view of.
Yeah, I guess it's like a cutaway. Yeah.
Yeah, a cutaway kind of when you see like an underground anthill thing at a science museum, like it's kind of like that.
Right, an ant farm.
Yeah, and
right.
That aesthetic reminds me of a lot of kids' books that I liked a lot when I was younger. And even stuff like, there were these Usborne puzzle books I had when I was a kid that were all different themes and like weird stuff, but they were kind of Where's Waldo Deluxe, where every page would have different, so sometimes you'd open a page, it's like a 2-page spread of a jungle or whatever, and you need to like find all the elephants in there. But then sometimes it would get weirder and it would have shape matching and it would kind of get more advanced as you go along. And there's like a greater narrative to it throughout. And it was just stuff that I freaking loved when I was a kid, and an art style that I really liked. And so seeing that feels very classic to me in that way. And it did kind of bring me back to my childhood. I would have been absolutely bananas for this when I was a kid.
Yeah. For me, it had a real Richard Scarry feel.
Oh, yeah.
In the way that if you zoom out, you can see everything at once. Like everything's kind of happening in the exact same moment. It's not really a sequential story. And obviously this is sequential, but when we get a good look at the burrow, it feels like that. It's almost more map-like in a way. You could kind of sit, like, you almost want it printed out. you want this movie printed out so you can just sit and stare and imagine what it's like to be part of that family, or stopping by, the Badgers place, or like taking a dip in the salamander tub. It's like it's interactive in a way. You get to tell your own story. And right off the bat, this one is, as soon as it goes underground, it's bringing up that feeling for me.
Yeah, I don't want to spend too much time on this, so if this is too much, we can cut this out. I also had this book when I was a kid that if this sounds like anything to anyone, please hit me up because I've never been able to find it again. But it was all anthropomorphic animal characters, and they had a time machine and they would go through time, and it was this huge book. So you'd flip it open and every page was kind of like this, but it would be like Egypt times. And it was so fun. I'd spend hours looking into that book because it was things happening all through. And then they'd have little annotations about how that was like a real historical thing. And it would be like Egyptians used papyrus as paper, whatever. And I would like to know, like, what is it about this type of aesthetic that is so appealing? I wanted to say to the child brain, but like, I still like it now. So I don't know. But why is that so engaging? It's also stuff I would draw when I was a kid. I would have like big scenes, and I'm like goofing off in class, exactly. And I would draw. Most of mine were like wars between people on horseback and people riding velociraptors and then like fighting each other, which I drew over and over again as a kid for some reason. I don't know. But we just love that. I guess you just want to spend a bunch of time telling a story all over the place at the same time.
Yeah, presenting like the whole world. Because to me, when you really learn to tell a story, you choose a point of view and you start to learn framing and how to move like the camera of the mind around a space. So naturally, when you're a little kid, your first instinct is to just use that whole page and just dump everything out onto it. It's like you haven't learned like story structure yet. You're just kind of like throwing all these pieces down.
There's no timeline. It's just everything is now. That feels real to me.
Yeah, everything is now. So another aesthetic angle of this, aside from that kind of cutaway children's book vibe, is the director. I think she actually points this out specifically in an interview I was listening to. There's a real British properness, old-fashioned vintage storytelling built into like the DNA of this, particularly like Beatrix Potter is an influence. And this other author I'd never heard of named Jill Barklam, who is just classic British kids lit. So her series is called Bramley Hedge, which of course it is.
Oh, I love it.
A couple titles from it just because they just feel so good to say. One of the titles from the Bramley Hedge series is Sea Story, Primrose and Wilfred Sail to Sandy Bay.
Oh my God, I love it.
It's just poetry. It's like little kids, soft, cuddly poetry. It's beautiful.
Yeah, like I feel like I read those as a kid, and I definitely didn't. This is the first I'm hearing of them, but
if you saw them, they just fit in the zeitgeist of that. Like animal communities, lots of overalls, like somebody's got a corduroy blazer on, big buttons.
Yeah. Oh, I'm looking at the poster for Burrow right now, and I'm homing in on this, like a frog in this big padded chair with a bookshelf, like a reading nook kind of thing. And it's exactly that. That's the aesthetic.
Yeah. It's like British houses from the 1920s or something, maybe. We weren't there, so it's hard to tell. Like, it's definitely a fantasy world.
Our fantasy conception of British houses from the 1920s.
Yeah. And a big other driving factor with a lot of, these types of kids stories is the changing of seasons. Like Bramley Hedge has books that are built into specific seasons. And that makes a lot of sense because animals change throughout seasons too. And that's a good way to try to communicate to kids the passage of time and like who's around what time of year and, just the breakdown of time. It's kind of an interesting aspect of a lot of this type of storytelling.
I have a jumping off point to what I feel like could be its own episode. So I hope it doesn't spiral out of control. I trust our judgment, reining it in.
Right.
But it just makes me wonder. I think we'll get into this later in the episode, but that your point about the changing of the seasons just makes me think about, like, why are these stories so common? And there are so many permutations of this kind of I was going to say cozy animal story. They're not all cozy, but there's a nugget of like a genre that is this. And I've never understood why. Like, why do people gravitate towards telling stories and just everyone is an animal, which is funny because I do that. Like, a lot of my own personal stuff is driven more about animal characterization than it is about like the human form. I've never really thought about that too much. I don't know. I always assumed it was because I was really like drawing people was hard when I was a kid and I felt like drawing animals was easier. I don't know. Who knows?
I think it's a good way to connect with people on an idea. And it works best for young kids because they haven't had a lot of experience with the world. They haven't known a lot of types of people, but they've seen animals through books or zoos or wherever. So I think it's just like a gateway to, it's like an opening for communication on a concept, right? And I think we're actually we're going to come back to this conversation at the, after we talk about Burrow and we start to talk about other animal stories that we were into when we were kids. Cause that's like, to me, what you're saying right now is exactly like why I love some of these stories we're going to get into later. So yeah, like put a bookmark right there and we'll get back to it. Did you do it? Did you put the bookmark in there?
Yeah, I did. Always checking up on me. Yeah, I did it. Okay. Bookmarked.
Okay. There. So our director here, I don't know how old she is. She has really wrapped her head around her flavor of storytelling to this point, and I found it very insightful and charming and enjoyable on all levels to hear her talk about this movie, this short, and the process behind it. And right off the bat, like just getting into kind of the character design of this world a little bit. There's the joy of, she spoke a little bit about picking the animals. So this is something else that I think connects it to kids storytelling, is the type of animals she was picking was stuff that she saw when she was a kid, which totally makes sense. And that's why these things feel very regional or like exotic when you read like a Jungle Book or like a Rudyard Kipling story. Like they feel a little more exotic, not because of the people, because they're often just English people, but it's because of the types of animals. And Madeline, our director, said she chose animals from California because that's where she was growing up. So you're seeing like rabbits and moles and salamanders and whatnot. And then they just sort of selected in a more like kind of North American range. And she described it like being in a candy store, which is like perfect, I think, because that's, I feel like when we talk about the draw of animation, like why we want to, you know, watch and be part of this industry in whatever way we can, it is like being in a candy store to like get to know these characters and see them like come to life on screen. They're just so like delicious.
Yeah, I can imagine too in the role of the creator when you're like, oh, the possibilities are endless, you say?
Yeah.
They're endless? Like, okay, well, you know, get ready for everything. I do want to note at this point, if I'm not mistaken, which I totally get for aesthetic reasons, but I think that the badger, sorry for being a huge nerd, everyone, the badger that's in this short briefly is a European badger. I'm fairly certain.
Ooh.
Because I did a badger drawing last year. I did kind of a series of animals. I was trying to raise money for the Australian bushfires. Mm-hmm. And I did a badger and I looked up North American badger and I was like, nah, because they're just not that
not
cute.
Enough.
I don't know. I mean, Google it, but they're just like a little more like, well, they look American. You know, they look like they are aggressive and don't want to spend time with you or be nice to you. And like the European badger really evokes my Redwall memories, which we'll definitely get into later. So
yeah,
I could be wrong. Anyway, fun fact.
We do have some expectations of what animals look like to some degree. And I don't know if it's more because of our experiences with them in real life or our experiences with them from animation.
Redwall.
Like, is it, yeah, or yeah, these stories. Like I definitely spent, I don't know, I lived in the country. I was outside a lot, but I probably spent more time inside with some of these books and cartoons than I did outside looking at a rabbit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I grew up basically on a farm with like sheep and horses and like a million dogs and whatever. And I was outside a lot too, but also very much inside a lot.
Yeah.
Reading books and playing video games.
Yeah, because real animals stink.
Yeah, man. One time I have a vivid memory of falling off my horse and I was like, this sucks. And I went inside and I rode around on the horse in Ocarina of Time for like an hour and a half because that horse can't throw you.
No.
Totally safe on Epona. So anyway.
Okay, a couple of little things, just talking about the feel of this movie that I pulled from an interview. And I didn't notice this watching it, maybe because my TV sucks or whatever, or it's not big enough. But all the line art in this movie is a dark brown instead of black.
Wow.
Which, brilliant move. Because
I didn't notice that either.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Subtle.
And it is very warm.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that. It's one of those The same as you're talking about the kitchen in Ratatouille, and it's all like coppery and it feels like familiar.
Mm-hmm.
That's what this has, that, but like from my childhood, I guess. Like it could, because of the aesthetic and all of those different things, and then the warm like gold and brown tones.
Right. It's all very unified in this kind of like fireplace, like you said, like library study armchair realm.
Yeah, pea green refrigerator.
So something else that I pulled from an interview that I thought was great, because as illustrators, both you and I, we watch these things on like multiple levels. We're engaged in the story, but we're also wondering how they did that, or like just marveling at whatever about it. So something I thought was pretty cool was the director was saying, because of the really short window of time they had to do this, like you said, 6 months about back in 2019, they didn't really have time to settle on models for a lot of these characters. So their bodies are all very soft. And that makes total sense, because when you're watching this, the characters, like, they don't feel like they have an, like true articulation points. They're kind of just like cute globs that bounce around. So, I mean, I think they play with that really well. Not having this like more refined model is allowing them to just be really loose and indulge the squash and stretch of the characters.
Yeah, and keeping it simple like that adds to the charm, and I guess a way that's like a big win-win. But you know, like that was the old Disney whole like conception of character design, is like make them round to like make them appealing, and it totally works, and it's super cute. I mean, I can't even, some of these, all the little mice and the rats, like I just can't even handle it. They're so cute. And they're just like their little round noses, and you know, they're like kind of, they're just sort of like, they have a body. And it's this like, it's like that flour sack thing where like in animation, you know, you maybe like animate a flour sack as a character doing a bunch of stuff, and that can kind of give you a better idea of how the form should work, and visualizing the dimensionality of it before you start to add complicated stuff like arms and legs. So a lot of them have this kind of like, they're like a little pod, or they're a little flour sack or whatever. And then they got their little legs, and it's like they were just made to be plush toys.
Yeah, and they feel like that. And I like that you brought up that old Disney technique of like bringing the flour sack to life. I heard this quote, and I was watching this documentary yesterday about Ragtime Piano from 2012. It was really shittily made.
It's a Monday night, and I am feeling myself.
Shot on digital video. It looked awful. But this one random guy in here said this thing that I was like, holy shit, that makes a lot of sense. I didn't think I was going to really take anything away from this movie. And it's another story why I was even watching it. But he said emotion is motion. And he was talking about playing the piano. And it's like, really, that's the one rule. Like when you're learning to animate or design a character, whether you're putting it in a comic or a cartoon or whatever, it really is like figuring out how you can capture that motion. And you can apply it to a flour sack or a salamander or whatever design you want. But until you can make that thing feel like it's moving, you're never going to like empathize with it, which thanks, piano movie.
You can learn, you know, artists can come from anywhere. Anyone can cook.
And another, you know what this also makes me bring up? We'll never get through this. So you and I love to draw. we love to draw, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit. You're a lot more invested in the software side of things because you're like actually animating, whereas I'm drawing comics, so I'm doing basically just drawing keyframes or story, like glorified storyboards half the time. But there's a lot to be said, I would think, for learning to animate by hand first instead of like using all these programs with like built-in model designs, because you're kind of missing that like learn to do a flour sack type of exercise, right?
Well, God, this is so interesting to talk about because I don't even know where to begin.
I know, it's a giant floodgate I just opened, but
and it's good to talk about it though, especially if you're like younger and you want to do this. I still experience this now to this day. Like, how do you know what the hell to do or what to learn? There's too many options. And that in itself can be a problem if you want to, you know, how do you get a foundational knowledge in something when there's about 70 different foundations that you can start on? I don't know. I don't have an answer. You just got to pick one, I guess. Like you just take the punches as they go. But I mean, I definitely agree. And it's hard for me to also answer that just because I love doing cell animation. And so I spend a lot of time on that, even though that's not really what I get paid to do most of the time.
Yeah.
And like a lot of the animation that I do is in After Effects. And even if it's a character animation, it's a rig that most of the time I have built. And on the projects I work on, you don't have much time. So then you have to learn how to build the rig, which is very techie-ish. Mm-hmm. And then you have to animate it. And you have to do it all in the same amount of time and like da-da-da-da-da. So then you really have a lot of pressure to do it. And it is good. You want to spend time on those fundamentals.
Well, maybe it's like the warmth of some of these comes from there being at least some stage of the process that was drawn by hand. Like I don't actually know how this one was done. It seems like it's cell art to some degree.
This is cell art. They made it in TV Paint, which is a cell program. And there are times when you're watching it where I sort of feel like there's a little bit of, I don't know if I'd call it puppeting, but, repeating a frame here and there, like parts of the animation just to probably for time reasons. But this is certainly a hand-drawn animation.
Yeah. And not only is that maybe just the aesthetic they want to use, but it also, these types of stories are complemented by that really well. Like cute animals work best when they're soft and hand-drawn and they can kind of move in that hand-drawn squash and stretch style.
Yeah, like I never want to sit here and be like 2D was the best and like 3D is no good. Because I mean, honestly, I don't even feel that way at all. I know people can go hardline one way or the other, and I'm just all animation is good and I love it. But you do have to you can't have a certain aesthetic every way. So in 3D, yes, we've gotten really, really good at making 2D style. I mean, just look at Spider-Verse is like getting there with different parts of it. And there's like, anime that people make now that's all 3D models, but they do it in a way that it looks 2D and it's just constantly getting closer and closer to being indistinguishable. But for stuff like this is hearkening to a specific aesthetic that we've kind of spoken to with all of like the European, like old British, like story influences and all of these things that I'd like to know what they would have done if they'd made it in 3D trying to get that aesthetic. But this is just, you want a charming, like watercolory sort of background, make that, paint that. And even this is all, digitally painted. I'm sure they weren't literally like painting the illustrations on, cold press or whatever. But yeah, it was just, I'm sure that is what made the most sense. You're looking at all the visual inspiration, draw it, because it's going to look like the drawings that you're kind of vibing with, that you're, inspired by.
Yeah. And it also, we don't really know the time and place of this world of this story, but by applying these aesthetic choices, you can evoke a time and place of when these stories were maybe originally published in this style, right? Like I was saying earlier, this feels like a Beatrix Potter piece from, kind of turn of the century children's lit. Like all these things are kind of there in it, and you're not going to really know the date of any of them, but they are going to feel like from some long pre-digital era, of this past of like warm, cozy morality stories.
And what is the morality story here?
Oh, like theme wise?
Be a good neighbor, I guess.
Yeah, it really is, right? It's kind of about community. So, oh boy, I don't know if you watched this interview with the director, but it's like this is all just fresh enough for her still, even though they did finish the movie in 2019 and it's just coming out now. So
that is surprising. I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, she said they did it all in studio. Nobody was working from home at this point. So
wow.
Unlike some of Soul, which I think was done during quarantine era 2020, this was all done before that. So that was kind of an interesting little tidbit. It's kind of removed. It's like the last piece of media from pre-COVID or something.
Yeah, an old vintage piece.
Yeah. But she was really, and I have this sort of thing too, I think, when I'm working on something, she was really living in this cycle of, I wrote this story. It's about this. We started working on it, and I learned what it was about while making it, to come back around to realize I hadn't quite mastered those ideas yet. Like this idea of this project speaking to the idea that being Take a breath, Ira.
You're getting too enthusiastic.
So she said this is really about asking for help, right? The story. And if you're an animator or like anybody that works collaboratively, you have to ask for help because that's the game. You're all working together and you have to be revealing about process and your weaknesses and strengths equally to get something done. And she was talking a lot about how, I'm sure we can both speak to this to some degree. And if we want to talk about like a certain project we had this feeling on, I think that's fine. But being really prideful about choices you're making and trying to get something locked in before anybody else gets to see it. She was saying that was something that was really hard for her in college in her early year. She's pretty young, apparently, because this story came from a CalArts a project she had started at school, but like never brought to fruition. She just like revived it for that. So I that makes me feel like she's quite young.
Cool.
I don't know if you had come across that, but I was like, oh, you got to be, I don't know, you probably are in your 20s, I think, if you're still pulling from like your college stuff, right?
I do imagine so. And like, I'm regretting at this point, I didn't look more into this. I haven't read any interviews by her, but I've seen a little bit of her work. She has some shorts that she's done on Vimeo.
Yeah.
But that's the impression I got just because there's not like a ton, like a huge wealth of stuff or like a giant reel or whatever that I could find. So I imagine, she's probably like pretty early on in her career. Mm-hmm. But her other stuff is so cute. And it totally like, I see the thread of her work, kind of like of Burrow in the stuff of hers that I've seen.
Right.
That's about all I know.
She brought up this good line of talking about like prideful artists and this thing you have to kind of mature to being able to show work when it's broken. I thought that was just put really well, because whether, you have a collaborator or an editor or somebody you're presenting something to, it can't always be like the perfect vision because odds are it's going to be taken apart again. So you can't be like so precious with it. So just for your own sake, like sharing stuff when it's broken is important. I thought that was like a good little lesson that she was able to work into this.
I love that, honestly. And I don't know, I actually have a ton of stuff, like thoughts and feelings about this that I won't go into now because it's just like I could write a book about this probably. But stuff that we talked about in the Spider-Verse episode too, where in creative work, collaboration is really important. And there's also, though, an undercurrent of being an auteur is like so awesome and it's like what you should aspire to be and your vision is whatever. And this is something I talk about with my friends who have taught college classes and stuff like that, where, or, even in reflection on your own art school experiences, I was like, oh my God, yeah, like they totally bake this into you and they want you to kind of worship the stars in your field and like go out there and like, do all this stuff. And I remember when I was in college and I was like, I want to work for like a big studio. I want to work for Pixar. And one of my design professors was just like, you're just going to be part of a pipeline. Like it was the worst thing ever. And I was like, in hindsight, I'm like, is a graphic design program. And in hindsight, I'm like, graphic designers are not that cool. Like, it's not like I was going to graduate college and like be king of a graphic design studio and everybody's enacting my vision. Like, that's not reality either. So why are we teaching young creatives, you're going to go out there and rock the world with your stuff? No, you're not. You're going to work on a team and you're going to do it, you're going to work together and you're going to make something that's for a client. So it's not even for you. You're going to make what the client wants. That's not to crush the dreams of anybody out there because there are so many ways to use creativity in like a cool, fun way. Mm-hmm. But just like realistically, it is a job. If you're doing it for a job, if you're working full time for a place, and that means you're working for someone most of the time. It's certainly not working for yourself, running a whole Pixar-sized studio right out of college. That doesn't happen to people. Yeah. You got to work together with people. And if you are really invested in that side of yourself where you're going to like auteur your vision, you're going to burn some bridges probably, actually. It's just too difficult. And honestly, it sucks for the people that you're trying to work with. If somebody's approaching you with a collaborative mindset and you're like, actually, this is my thing and I'm going to sort of treat you like you are the intern on the project, that's going to be an issue. I think people do this without thinking. I honestly think most creative people probably, you have a seed of that in you somewhere, no matter what. because it's just bred into you. Like, even looking at all the Pixar stuff, there's that. If you read a history of any animation studio, it's just like, it's so awesome and like da 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 da. And they don't really talk a lot about all the assistants that work on the stuff and like all the in-betweeners that like actually made the rest of your animation or whatever.
Right.
And it's just important to acknowledge all of that. And I don't know. Anyway, look for my book coming in 2022 or whatever about how everybody should just be nice to each other, I guess, even if I'm not always good at that.
Yeah. And I think that's what why this short is so effective, because it's charming. It's got cute little animals, but it's also the product of a young filmmaker who is able to say what she wants to say. And what she wants to say is that it's hard to work together. And that's what she's probably thinking about every day. Like, this is going to probably come up more often than not. But anytime we watch one of these movies and it's good, it's probably because it speaks to the feelings of the creator. And these people are animators. They work in creative industries. And that's going to be the themes that show up in these movies, right? Working together, like finding your place on a team, finding your voice.
And even, I mean, they're building something in the short. Like, it's not, they're not doing an animation together, but they're creating a home. Essentially, this person is spending all this time like expending energy trying to figure out where they belong and where their spot is. But I like that it's cute that it's essentially about a project, which the project is like, you know, I'm going to make this and I need to be able to fit in amongst you. And I need to figure out how to like not feel weird about that. And then, you know, when you actually get around to that, it turns out everybody's like, hey, awesome. Like, here's your spot. Like, let's, you know, and do you need any help putting the disco ball in your bathroom?
Yeah, the disco bathroom.
It's the dream. That's the dream. Not the disco bathroom, but kind of the communal, you know, aid situation. But also the disco bathroom is cool. I don't hate that.
Once I heard that kind of quote from her in this reveal about, you know, this project just being about being part of something and being able to like let go of your pride a bit and show that you do have weaknesses and that you can be embarrassed about something, and, you know, taking the risk that other people are going to accept that about you, you start to see those themes pop up in every story beat of this movie. So our little bunny, she starts with the mailbox, right? And then she starts digging her hole with her little shovel, and she's got her plan. And right off the bat, it all begins with seeing another animal that's got a better plan. So it's like suddenly everything's like put in a new context, which I feel is like every time I go on Instagram, it's just like anything I've ever made is suddenly put in the context of the rest of the world. And it's just so relatable right off the bat with this poor little character. You're like, yeah, that is so true. And then it's like kind of the rest of your life is the journey to just not be embarrassed about what you're doing.
Yeah, really. You gotta not worry about it. You gotta not worry about what other people are doing. You gotta just do your own thing. And like, before you know it, honestly, most of the time you'll be fine. But it's so hard when you're younger. I don't know. I'm at that crux too, where I talk about this every episode now, probably, where I just turned 30 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like people are always like, well, your 30s are like much better because you're less worried about like what other people think. And honestly, I mean, I do think it's true that I didn't really care that much what other people thought anyway, generally ish, but it is real. I swear to God, I'm not that deep into 30 and I was like, wait, okay, now I really can just do whatever I want. Like, I did have some angst about that. Oh, like my 20s, I spent doing blah, blah, blah. And now I'm like old or whatever. And then you get there and you're like, wait, that's made up.
It is, yeah.
Like none of the stuff I was worried about actually matters at all. It was like literally overnight. I felt so different about it. Mm-hmm. And that is true. That's what it all, it's like a matter of perspective. Like a lot of your embarrassment and like feeling shy about stuff it's just coming from inside you. It's not real.
Right. Yeah. You do have to take like this little journey, like this bunny goes on. Here's a great little, of course, I'm probably reading too much into, you know what? Maybe I'm not. I don't think I am. I'm not reading too much into this.
It's cartoon feelings. Can that be our podcast tagline? I'm not underlined reading too much into this.
Yeah, as if somebody's arguing with me. If you're listening to this is what you're here for. So
yeah, if you've made it this far, you know.
Okay, so the mole has the better plans. That's embarrassment. Then the mouse has a better sense of community. And the mouse is kind of like revealed this idea. Well, it's not just one burrow hole. It's like a network of burrow holes. And the little mouse also takes out a pen to offer like, here's how to make the changes. And I think the bunny like pulls the paper away, which is just such a great, probably like, you know, these sweatbox stories of people like drawing on each other's work, like from the old days of like Disney era where it's just pencils and paper flying around a room. Like there's like, you kind of want to be there, but you also know it sucked. This idea of like people putting their pencil on your work.
Yeah, that's not a good feel for sure.
But it's like, it's an important part of it is to overcome like the sense that this is 100% yours. It's like, oh, maybe somebody does have, you know, an insight that I can build off of.
Yeah, I totally don't believe. Oh man, you just tee me up left and right for my little monologues. I just don't believe anything is 100% yours. We live in a society. It can't. It isn't. And I think a lot of people, we get a conception that that is the case for some people just because they don't talk about the process stuff or they don't talk about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's also like sometimes there's an exclusion attitude in certain like echelons of creative groups, whatever.
Yeah.
But it does matter. One of the lessons you'll always learn as a creative person in the world is getting the feedback when you're like, that's dumb. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then you do the feedback and it's so much better.
Right.
And you're like, wait, shit. And I guess everybody does have to go through that. I certainly did.
I think you also learn to get a thrill from the reveal that it can be better. Because if you can look at that bigger context of like, before it wasn't as good, this person said this, now the whole project has risen. If you can remind yourself that that can happen, I don't know. I feel like that's a lot of it too, is being able to be like, oh, this is really going to help me. I have no idea how, but it could.
I think it's like getting the fun of it back. 'Cause having that wall up with people who don't want the feedback or they just kind of want to steamroll their thing, like that's not fun. And it makes you feel like they think that you're not as good or whatever. Even if that's not their intent, they're being protective of their vision or whatever. It just doesn't put the other person in a good state of mind. You know, best case scenario, it just doesn't feel good. And to me, there's like nothing more pleasant. Hence this entire podcast, honestly. There's nothing more pleasant than talking about the thing that you love with somebody else, even if you don't agree. So if I'm like, hey, I'm writing this story and I think the character blah, blah, blah. And if you, for example, were like, I don't think that works as well. And here's why. Maybe you should do this. Even if I don't even take your advice, if you're, not like treating me like I'm an idiot for like wanting to do my particular way or whatever, we're just having a back and forth. Like that's fun as hell. Like we both love this. We both are passionate about it. Like the world could just only benefit from people just geeking out about stuff together. As long as you're making stuff, like you're doing fine.
And it's kind of like it's a game of communication because for that to work, I think the person making it really needs to be able to grasp what they are trying to say with their work, because the person on the other end, the best role they could play is helping that person say what they're trying to say. Even if you're collaborating, the idea has to originate somewhere, right? So it's like, now I'm helping you make this more clear. And then the original person can get mad because maybe they don't know what they're trying to say. And that's like the true frustration. And that's, I think, something that, when I'm teaching is really hard to communicate. Like a kid who's drawing something but doesn't want any advice might not know what they want to do with it yet. And that's what's so hard. It's like when little babies can't say words yet and they get frustrated, It's like that same like resentment or something that emerges when you're not sure what you're trying to do with something.
Which secretly is just the creative process and never goes away. It just escalates.
Yeah, you never grow out of that.
If you feel like you're getting really frustrated and stuck at a creative point, I always feel like you're just about to get it.
Yeah.
And like maybe go to bed or whatever and like do it tomorrow and you'll probably get it tomorrow. But like those days of just being pissed off because you can't do it are just inevitable. Lean in. This cartoon is about all these things. And I think what makes it a little lighter, like it's about these heavy themes and the director, will talk about this stuff.
I think it helps that we're not actually in the point of view of the rabbit 90% of the time. Like we're able to see that cutaway, like you were saying. Like we're able to see it, the rabbit dig down, how far they've gone, how close they are to other things. Because like if we're talking about this from the creative point of view, like when you're in the moment of like struggling to get something finished, like you're not sure what you're trying to say, you're trying to like work with the group, but you're embarrassed, you don't really know where you are in that journey, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what's scariest. Like this rabbit is scared because it doesn't know how deep underground it's going, like we do because we're watching. But you know, you got to feel bad for this bunny.
Oh, I totally do. And like they're like, I don't belong. Like you don't know any of these people. They're all strangers to you. You're probably afraid that they're going to reject you.
Yeah,
which is 100%
right?
a valid fear.
And even
not for the bunny, but just in life, like that's a real
Yeah.
fear. So of course it's scary, you know, in the moment.
And then they start to reject back because like we get exactly that moment when he meets the bunny meets the hedgehog family. It's like this cute older couple, it seems, and they offer her some food and she turns it down because she's like too proud.
The preemptive rejection of like, don't even show me any, like you're deciding yourself that you don't belong because you're afraid.
Yeah.
Which obviously is wrong.
Yeah.
Bunny, get it together. What are you doing? What are you thinking?
And like to me, that's like a really sad moment in the whole story because it's like now the character identifies as the rejected character in this whole situation, which is just like, that's a real shame. And this is right after the rabbit's dug a lot deeper too. So it's even further away from like its inevitable home that it's going to make. So it's great the way we cut away. I think it's like 2 different times to a break in the story where the rabbit just digs way, way down into this darker part. That's just so perfect way to kind of convey like the emotional state.
Well, even just like the perfect purity of this metaphor of like digging yourself a deeper and deeper hole until you're like in the shit, honestly.
Yeah.
Because you're panicking, and I'm just like, it's very effective.
Yeah, it's just that little simple idiom brought to total life and conveyed through these great little character moments that help you talk about this idea without really talking about it, which is like the benefit of an animal scene. So while we're in the middle of the story, maybe we can say who our favorite animal home is.
Yes.
So I'm going to take, and now you can't have it because I'm taking it.
I'm going to say it first.
Mine's Frog Library. I love the Frog Library.
I knew you were going to say the Frog Library. That's fine, though. It's not, I mean, it would have been up there. I'm actually going to have a hard time picking, but God, the Frog Library is good.
Yeah.
Oh, they got these little pots that they like raise and lower themselves up in, and a tall ladder.
I know. Oh, they're so cute.
There's
I
a
like that they
side
just
room
look...
has a spiral staircase and like a lofted area of the library. Like, I would pay us so much money to have a home like this.
It's a great change from the rounder, softer characters we've seen because they're a little more leggy.
Yeah.
They've got like really long, nimble legs. It's just kind of a fresh little moment. And they're green, which, we haven't seen green in a while.
The warm green in this is so nice too.
Yeah.
That's like I usually notice a lot when people use green in like the Emma remake in 2020, which is a live action movie, whatever. But it's like a lot of pink and green is the overtones. And that's so unusual. Like most places, like usually, I guess because it's like an unnatural, like not human flesh color. But when people go for green and stuff like that, I like it a lot. And it's got that nice, just like the copper, like pots, and then the green like library lamps is just like, oh yes, like this is so nice.
Yeah, it's the perfect
I
room.
also like the inclusion of what are they, amphibians, I guess.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In this, that's not something like Redwall never had that. It was like, we have these types of animals, mammals only. Maybe a bird will show up and they're like giant and scary and like murdery. No frogs, whatever. Now I'm saying that, I'm like, maybe a frog showed up on occasion. It's been a while, okay? But like generally they're not, and I don't know, in animal stories, like, they didn't kind of get the same, like, they're civilized and they wear a little scarf treatment as like the bunny or they just don't show up as much, which I guess maybe like on paper they were icky, like, and people didn't want to, but they're so cute in this, and I really like the little salamanders.
Oh, the embarrassed. Yeah. In that case, the salamander's the embarrassed one because they're having a little tub time.
Oh, I do not know if they were embarrassed, honestly. It's a little concerning to me. It's the one part where she's in the locker room and the salamander comes off and just whips off his towel. And I was like,
right.
oh,
That's
hello.
true.
Okay.
The reveal.
Which I love. I also, I can't believe I noticed this because it goes by so fast, but there's a part where she's going through the salamander thing. And in the sauna room, one of them is playing with a little kit bull. It's like a little stuffed, black cat from the kit bull short. And I just think it's so cute. And I'm glad they did that. It's all the same
universe. Yeah.
So this is not my answer, though, I don't think.
Well, we're going to sit right here until you answer.
Honestly, well, so I guess I was just avoiding the inevitable. I think what my favorite one is the mouse.
Oh, yeah.
Hole. I'm trying to flip through the short right now to find like an overall of it because it's so cute and it's got it's like a whole bedroom, not bedroom. Wow. It's like a whole like suburban house.
Right.
And there's one of the mice is like in its little bedroom, like on the phone, like on his little corded phone. And truly, I cannot find where this is because I want to describe it in more detail, but I don't know where in the short it happened.
It is. I know while you're looking, it is the most appealing scene because everybody's kind of in their own little vignette of doing exactly what you would want to be doing in that room, like kicking back and talking on the phone. No worries in the world.
Yeah, there's two. Okay, I did find it. This is where the little pea green fridge is too, which I just I love it so much.
Yeah.
But there's two little mice jumping on a bed, and then there's two over on a side burrow that are sleeping, but they're on a bunk bed. And it's one of this is something I would draw. I would love to draw with my my mouse and rat aesthetic that I've carefully cultivated over the years, and just look how cute they are, just living their cute little lives. Anytime the mice show up in this, it's really. Because I think my runner-up would be during one of the really quick scenes where you see a bunch of different burrows and animals, and she's tunneling through. In the bottom of the screen, you can see two rats that are dancing in a disco room. And I just feel like I connect really deeply and spiritually with that. It just speaks to me.
Dancing by yourself.
You have seen, and rats with only my... The ant room, too, I think deserves a little bit of love. I don't want to be... Yeah,
the little ant. It's are they in a nightclub
Beatles,
or what's
I guess?
going on there?
It looks like they're in a fancy restaurant.
Okay. Yeah, there's a little Pixar jazz music-y interlude here for a second.
Yeah, because in the top left, there's, I guess, the kitchen. I just fucking love this. It's a little beetle guy or whatever they are, and he's, chef cleavering a giant mushroom, a normal-sized mushroom, and I'm just... that's the stuff. And I guess he's got a whole little garden of mushrooms and stuff down there too.
We're actually we're gonna come back to that topic because I might as well just say it here. Beatrix Potter was I don't remember the term, but a mushroomologist, a fungologist or something until she was 30 years old. So I wonder if that's a little shout out. What is it? Mycology,
the study of mushrooms, I guess.
Yeah. Do you know that off the top of your head?
I had a feeling it was something like that because I love a good mushroom, and I'm a big fan of Jeff Vandermeer's work as an author, and he's really into mushrooms, so it comes up a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, I mean, it's not like mushrooms are an obscure and weird topic, but that just kind of reminded me of the way a lot of the artists who tell stories in these spaces, at least in that first wave of this, not first wave, but the wave of the 20s and 30s, they're really tied to the natural world and being part of that. And that's probably why these stories emerge from.
Yeah. I wonder, I guess she probably spent time out there drawing mushrooms.
Yeah.
And studying them firsthand. And I wonder if that's where a lot of that came from.
She was a conservationist.
She seems like she was cool as hell.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. A great illustrator. So, something that's great about these animal stories, and this kind of happens after we see the ant restaurant and we meet the badger really quick, is there's just perfect conflict in the animal world for storytelling, right? So inevitably the bunny is going to dig so deep they hit the water table. And it's a perfect thing to get in the way of the rabbit's progress, but also it's just the natural world too. You don't have to explain the water table. It just is there. And if you dig too deep, you hit it.
Yeah, that's a good point because I didn't really think about that, which I guess is a testament to exactly what you're saying. But
it's just inevitable, right? It's like the parts of these stories are often inevitable.
yeah. And usually it is, even in this one, it's almost, like this wouldn't have happened if the bunny hadn't cracked it. But a lot of the time, it's just an event.
Yeah,
that
like
occurs.
a rainstorm or whatever, or like a migration, like all these, or the farmer's tractor, like all these things just enter into the animal world without their control. So it just makes I don't know, the stakes always feel uniquely high in animal stories. Like, I think that's maybe part of what draws us to them or something.
Yeah, a lot of them too. Well, I'm just thinking like animals' conflict with man is something that comes up a lot too. Because I can't believe we haven't mentioned this at this point, but there's a lot of stuff in this short that is reminiscent of Fantastic Mr. Fox.
Yeah,
which I know
totally.
you had a note in your notes thing.
Just a Wes Anderson vibe. Yeah, plus a Roald Dahl vibe.
The burrowing when they're like standing upright but like actively burrowing is very, I have to imagine that's like a straight up reference.
Yeah, it's gotta be.
I haven't seen that aesthetic anywhere else, which is a great visual and it works really well. But the whole plot in Fantastic Mr. Fox, well, I guess it's like Fox's hubris, and just like being uppity is his downfall. But it's like direct conflict with human people who then come after you with their guns. That's also something that comes up, but it's like those two things. It's like there's a fire in the forest, or a man is in the forest, or both, and they're related. What do you do? How do you survive?
Yeah, you're trapped between two situations and they're both like closing in on you from both sides.
And this is kind of a pivot from our topic in general that we're talking about right now, but the water table thing, I like, and this is something maybe I like about short stories, that it's almost hard to overburden it. Especially if you have 6 months to make this, like, go make it. You don't have that much time to be like, let's make it convoluted, or like, and then what about this? And what about this? And then you keep adding stuff and it gets weird and confusing. You don't. Like, the bad guy in this is partially, the bunny's inner problems and issues that she needs to figure out and wrestle with. And then partially it's like, if you dig too deep, there's water. That's it. And like, so there's no like, did you do this that set off this that enabled this to happen? And that's why the water came out.
Right. Yeah.
There's none of that. You just get to absorb a story. That's the appeal of shorts, I guess, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. It's not too clever, right? Like, we didn't have to set up a pipe at the beginning and then have it like pay off in the third act or whatever. It's just sort of, the story is, I mean, things do cycle back around, but we don't have those like clever moves.
Yeah, there's no like giant red amulet in this that she needs to use to like put her house back underground and like unflood all the water. Like, there's none of that.
I would have loved to see Mrs. Jonathan Frisbee just show up in one of those little rooms.
She'd be cute in this style for sure, too. So cute.
That's the reboot. Oh, maybe
Burrow
she'll do that.
The Burrow of Nim.
I want to see this director reboot The Secret of Nim.
I'm into that. People also should make some Beatrix Potter movies. Like, maybe now's the time. I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
Let's modernize it.
Everybody was like so into like Paddington 2. People want this sort of British, cozy, mince
That's
pie
so true.
flavor.
Yeah.
Like, bring it back. Come on, don't take the freaking risk. I don't know who I'm talking to.
But listen here, you.
I don't know enough about this industry to accuse anybody or like direct my aggravation.
If anybody writes in all mad that we called them out, then we'll know who we're talking to.
Okay, well, we're kind of almost at the end of this perfect little story. Well, we meet the badger real quick, but just through their teeth. And then we get the water table. And then we come back and we actually meet this badger, which is not the North American badger we had once believed, as you.
Yeah, I swear. I bet.
Just ruin this whole
gold
thing.
dollar on this is a European. But I mean, it's fine. He maybe moved here. We don't know.
Oh, that's true.
I don't know the story.
And then the bunny finally learns her little lesson, which is that it's okay to ask for help, which is very humble and charming. In a way, reminds me a bit about the humility of Mrs. Frisbee, like these character traits that are just too, I don't know what people, they're just too sensitive to like work into mainstream like action storytelling. But when, characters are vulnerable, I think everybody loves it. I don't know
Yeah.
why we don't get more of that in general.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of characters are like super cool and smart and strong and whatever, and like therefore aren't relatable. Like have, confidence issues or are human people at times, and have to like learn lessons or whatever. So it's more refreshing to see that. And then I'm like, oh yeah, no, totally. Like you can be Spider-Man and like a nerdy kid or whatever.
Yeah.
Like that's a little more I see that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see this other, like I'm not a Marvel character yet. Still waiting for the powers to kick in.
Yeah, let us keep us updated.
Any day now.
So then I guess the real resolution of all this story and kind of the satisfying payoff is our cute little bunny absorbs a little bit from a bunch of these different characters. Like she builds a home that's kind of inspired by the mouse's layout. And why wouldn't it be? It's a perfect setup.
So cozy. And she gets her disco bathroom, by God.
Hell yeah. Yeah. There's still like she's not that different really. Like she just kind of figured out how to fulfill her goal, right? She wasn't like sent on a totally different mission or anything. She doesn't have like a whole different thing. She still has what she wanted and friends.
Yeah, that's about it. That's about as much as you could ask for.
Yeah. And that's also about the length of the movie. So
roll credits, which are really cute. I love the style of them. Kind of a hand-drawn, scratchy sort of effect. The eyes are dotted with little bunny heads. Real nice touch. I like it a lot.
The indulgence of credits, it's just one of those things you love to see, which I think that's a phrase you use that I'm going to now start saying all the time.
Oh, yes. That's how you know people are real friends, when they start saying stuff that the other person said.
I mean, by episode 10, we'll just be like saying all the same shit. But
we won't be cool anymore.
To me, when I see the hand-drawn credits or the credits in the style of the movie, it's almost like the creative team couldn't say goodbye to this project. They just want to keep being in this world. And oh yeah, hey, no, I can write everybody's name like this.
Yeah.
It's just like one of those things. I love it. And now everybody does like cool credits because they must realize that it's so fun to see, and just adds like a bit of authenticity to a movie or story.
Yeah, it is. It's just, and like, why wouldn't you? For an animated movie, it's almost like a no-brainer. Like, you're already animating. Make something cool for the credit stuff.
Yeah, do it.
And they do.
The reason you wouldn't is because you don't care that much about your movie. That's what I mean. Like,
or budget. I don't know. I want to make an allowance. Maybe you don't have time, but it does certainly. I mean, you wouldn't do it for something that you don't really care about, presumably.
Yeah, you just go like Times New Roman on black and center justified and let them roll.
Yeah, I love it when Disney's done a lot of this lately too, where they have a little thing at the end, like at the end of Moana, there's another cameo from the crab guy.
Oh yeah,
Tamatoa, and it's just funny and it's cute, and it does reward you for just kind of hanging out. You actually get yelled at by Terry if you hang out during the soul credits to the end, which is really interesting because it's really fast. It's like a 2-second clip, and she says, "Movie's over, go home." And I'm like, "Oh, that was for a theater experience, which I didn't have." Don't you know I am home?
I did notice that. It's like, is that going to be the last time anybody does that? But it is also such a callback to when, I don't know when that kind of fourth wall breaking and the end credits thing started happening.
The first time I remember it, I will say, this is an aside, maybe we cut this out, I don't know, but just for you to know, in Toy Story 2, when Barbie is doing the like, bye everybody, like goodbye, I remember watching that in the theater, and it's just such a vivid experience where I remember standing in the aisle of the theater and watching her carry on and then be like, are they gone? Like, oh my God, I can finally relax type of a deal.
Oh man.
As a kid, I was like, damn, that's funny. I'm like, however old, but I was like, this is hilarious. Like, I was fully on board for that bit.
Oh, wow. Now I'm really sentimental for that experience of standing in the aisle of a theater that's like empty except for you and like the one other random person on the other side who's also like waiting for that last little glimpse of the movie to pop up. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
It's a little memorial to theater experiences. May we have them again.
Yeah, we'll see. Okay, want to take a quick little break and then let's talk about animal stories more?
I love it. I love it.
Okay, good. I thought we would get into some of our favorite or, maybe most influential animals stories from our childhood. So since we're already in the zone, and who knows when we'll be back to the world of animals.
Oh God,
probably
tomorrow.
Pretty soon,
yeah,
actually.
like all the time, always. But I think this sounds awesome, as is probably clear from my general whole personality and everything about me. I love animal stories, so I got some ready to go.
Okay, so we'll just kind of go back and forth. Let's start with The Tale of Peter Rabbit, which is one that I picked because we were already kind of in the Beatrix Potter zone a little. So this is her original, whatever this universe of Peter Rabbit that she built kind of set around the Mr. McGregor's garden. This is the original story that I'm putting on my list here. The original Tale of Peter Rabbit, which is, I believe, the first thing she wrote as an author, because up until she was around 30, she was a natural scientist and conservationist, and she was also a writer. And she was also a mushroomologist, or whatever the term was you had.
Mushroom enthusiast, a mycologist, if you will.
Yeah. First of all, you got great names. You got Peter Rabbit, you got Flopsy, you got Mopsy, and then you got the one-off Cottontail, which I don't know why they couldn't just do another Zopsy.
Cottontail was
Zopsy,
more put together than Flopsy, Mopsy, etc. A little more straight-laced.
So like Burrow, this story appeals because it sits in a very like constrained world. Like Burrow is in this very specific underground zone, kind of like Sim City style. It's like a very specific grid in which you can build in, I imagine, when I think of like the layout of Burrow. For this, it's like Mr. McGregor's garden and then kind of these adjacent spaces where like the rabbits have to traverse this garden. There's the vegetables, but then there's also the blackberries on the other side of the lane. So if you're not familiar with Tale of Peter Rabbit, basically the 4 rabbit siblings are sent off to the baker. But of course, their mom's like, whatever you do, don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden and get all the good, delicious stuff. And of course, Peter does it because that's just
Peter.
He's like, I mean, I guess. Oh, okay. Midway through the plot, I gotta ask this. Not that there's like gender breakdowns with these stories, really, but is this like Peter Rabbit's like the boy of the story?
Yeah,
is
the
always
idiot
the one
boy.
like getting in trouble.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. This is like that archetype.
Yeah.
Like, did you relate, like, when you encountered this story when you were a kid, were you like, yeah, I want to get into trouble too? Or like, how do you feel about this story?
That's a great, well, I will start off by saying that like this story in particular is actually like kind of near and dear to my heart. And I have like a dumb capitalistic reason, I guess, for that. But it from a tender place where my mom, for Easter, our chocolate rabbit was always this Palmer Peter Rabbit chocolate rabbit that you can still get like anytime it's Easter in any grocery store, but ever since I was like a wee baby, always those chocolate rabbits every year. And they come with like a little booklet of the Peter Rabbit story. And my mom just seemed to have a special affinity for stories like this. Your classic kind of like cozy British stories, I guess, as we were talking about. And she would read it to us, stuff like that. And it was always a specific story. It's the one that I know best from Beatrix Potter. I don't know.
This is the classic.
I feel like I was always pretty risk averse, as I've said before. I don't know if I would go busting into the lane, but like I definitely was a cut up as a kid. I could see the appeal of when you're a kid, you kind of, maybe I wouldn't have, done Peter's actions as well, but like, you get a rule, you want to not follow the rule. Like that was something that I could kind of get behind as a kid. I'm like, yeah, like I should be able to just do these things. Like, or like, oh, don't, if you tell me not to do something, it's probably because it's like juicy or I got to find out why. So I'm going to go put my nose where it doesn't belong.
Yeah. Apparently this is a question I have for everything now is a lot of these stories kind of grow too big for their britches and they become like archetypes of characters. So like I didn't really used to think of this as when I was a kid, but something like a Luke Skywalker or like these characters that are so anxious to go off and like do a thing. I never really related to them. And it makes me wonder really deeply, like who really related to that? Like who really gets a Peter Rabbit type or like a Luke Skywalker type? These characters that like are drawn to adventure or something. It's more like, for me, it's more that I want to see them overcome it more than I want to be them. But maybe there's not actually a difference there.
Well, that's actually
just
interesting.
Trying to get in the head of people. I'm not sure.
Like the Luke Skywalker thing. It's funny you mentioned that because like I know my dad always really related to Luke Skywalker because like he had, you know, a tumultuous childhood. And when, you know, he was like exactly the age of Luke Skywalker when that movie came out. And Luke Skywalker's whole deal, like the way that he saw it, putting himself in his shoes was like, this is like kind of a kid who is being thrust into this really sad, stressful situation and then has to figure out how to make it work and like how to survive. And that was,
yeah.
And I think some of it is that, like, I didn't necessarily feel that with Luke Skywalker or like Peter Rabbit either, but like you see them kind of as people, I guess it depends. Like Luke Skywalker, I mean, maybe is like a large, like more adult, I guess, or more like young adult story. And then with Peter Rabbit, when you are a kid, you are kind of like, you know, he's doing what his mom tells him or he's not doing what his mom tells him. And that's like a situation you can directly be like, yeah, same. Like I also am being told how the world is, but also have the impetus to the inclination to find out if that's true or not.
Yeah, he's more curious.
Yeah. And I think he gets like sick or whatever and she has to coddle him back to health or something like that.
Yep. Yeah. So, well, I mean, I guess we're at a classic morality tale, which is interesting because that's the aspect of the, sorry, I took you on this Star Wars tangent. I don't know why the hell I did that.
We're always
that was
ready
just a bigger statement on,
shows up in every episode.
Just a bigger question on character types. But so, okay, Peter Rabbit, this morality tale of if you do the thing you're not supposed to, there's going to be like a consequence. Burrow doesn't take that from any of these stories because I think that comes up over and over again in Beatrix Potter and similar types of stories. This like morality of don't stray outside of, you know, the path or whatever, which is interesting because I think in general, we don't get kids stories that tell you what to do anymore in the way this kind of is doing, because Peter breaks the rules. He gets into the garden. He gets chased all over the place. And like, thank God he finds his way out of the garden again. But along the way, he's lost his adorable little blue jacket.
His little jacket.
And one of his tiny little pointy shoes.
So cute. A little lad.
I need to get a tattoo of one of his tiny shoes, like to scale of the book. So it'd be like 3 centimeters long. And then he gets home and all the other rabbits are there, you know, everybody's back together. Peter gets a chamomile tea and his good siblings get bread, milk, and blackberries, which obviously is like the dream meal. Yeah,
that's sweet. I remember when I was a kid and always wanted my milk, bread, and blackberries.
So it's a clear morality tale, right? It's like, if you do this, you get this. If you do this, you get this. The end.
Yeah, it's straight.
We don't see that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something we've touched on a little bit of like, what is the purpose of storytelling? And I don't know, the more modern, I guess, we get, the less storytelling is used explicitly as a device to instruct people on like how the world works and how to behave. Where I think maybe that's the root of it in humanity. I don't know if I'm being bold. I feel like that's why we're so story driven, is because it's like how
all the way back,
you know, like wolf cubs or whatever, like animals play fight because it's playing, but it's also teaching you how to function as like an adult. And kind of maybe that's just like the human brain way of being like, hey, you also have like a whole consciousness and that's like a big thing. So we need to figure out how to train you guys to not immediately die in the wild.
Yeah.
So we tell stories. I don't know. I think a lot of kids media that's aimed directly towards like young kids, really young children, still has that. Maybe I don't consume a lot of that content, so I'm not 100%
Yeah, that's true.
sure.
I guess I'm just missing. Yeah, you're right. This is all still there, but to some degree.
It's tough just because. Well, and then like, where's the line too? Because you know, a lot of people would be like, animated movies are for kids or whatever, and here we are, like adults with no children, fully here for it, because I don't think that really holds true. But obviously, like, the lines have been blurred, you know, in the modern times where you can really do anything, and people do. So, you know, and there's a lot more of just like all ages entertainment where they have like funny stuff for the adults, and then like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, this has a, you know, the Peter Rabbit universe has like a very specific tone. Like it's charming, cute. It's not particularly funny. It's not particularly dangerous, but it does have that sense of community, which I think is a big part of the world building of these types of authors, like in these children's universes, which then of course like grows, you know, we grow with that. Like we want to meet more people from Peter Rabbit's world after we hear this beginning story. Part of it is like maybe the incentive of the publisher, but I assume like the writer also like wants to kind of expand this world because this story just seemed to work so well. But you know, that gets away from the idea of the short, because we're probably never going to get a Burrow sequel or anything like that. That's
Burrow
more
2.
just like speaking to
Burrow to the
Yeah,
other
unless-
side of the planet. Scope.
Well, it's like, because at that
massive.
point, at that point, it becomes more about the characters and what could happen next than what the director had to say, right? So it would just be like a totally different thing to me.
Yeah, it would.
Okay, so if we're done with Peter Rabbit, we'll close the garden gate on that, and you can throw us an animal story.
Okay, well, I know we'll have a lot to say about this because I know we both like it. And none of mine are short form. Really, all of the ones that I've fathomed are longer. But Watership Down, and I guess I'm talking both the book and the movie. Although I know the book better. I read the book a lot when I was a kid. And then I only saw the cartoon when I was a little bit older, and it scared the bejesus out of me. But I also liked it a lot.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff in that. So Watership Down, if you don't know, is a book about rabbits. And how can I describe this? It's sort of, it's kind of got a morality tale to it, sort of. It's like a little convoluted because there's the main story of actual rabbits, and they leave their warren because one of them is like a seer and can see that doom is coming. So there's also a little bit of a supernatural element. But essentially they have a journey where they leave their warren where they're from, and they kind of strike out on their own, and they're trying to find a new place to live, which ends up being Watership Down. It's very nice. And all of the kind of trials and tribulations they go through to get there. And then sprinkled throughout the story, there's also this entire like myth structure of the rabbits. So they're the rabbits will use rabbit words for stuff as if they have their own language. That's something that is sprinkled throughout before. There's always these hints that they have this like greater world going on, but like it's very much set in the real world where, you know, they are afraid of humans and they have to, you know, worry about predation. But then there's like a creation story about how their god made all the animals and how the rabbit was special and all of this stuff. So it's just cool. It has a lot of stuff that we both like. It has a lot of elements of storytelling and then addressing storytelling, talking about storytelling, what that means. And also it's just kind of fun at times, but scary at times in the way that stories, especially stories when you're a kid, are kind of satisfying. I like kid stories that are scary and tell you that the world is dangerous. For some reason, there's that appeal.
Yeah. Boy, I'm treading very lightly on this one because we definitely are doing the Watership Down episode sooner than later.
We got to do that.
But I think it's a couple things that I'll just like touch on quickly is, yeah, totally correct with this appealed and was like my entry point into mythological storytelling, like kind of Homer type of epic poem, right? Because it seems to be like evoking the Odyssey a little bit, or sort of any of those like journey there and back again type of things. And there's definitely like a Joseph Campbell-ness to this because of the era it was made in. It's got like, it's part of that 70s, like early 70s.
And the way that the myths come
adventure
into the story is very Joseph Campbell. It's just the way that the messages are delivered. I can like practically hear him reading it.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's also paying tribute to those earlier British like fables and stories of like small worlds, but like big disasters of, in the animal world. So it just sits, I don't know, to me, this is such a unique thing. Not that a lot of other things aren't unique in their own way, but it's just a great pairing of that epic tale and like small adventure at the same time.
Yeah, I think, and like something that's kind of unique about it is that I think it's just easy to dismiss it on paper as like, oh, it's like a book about talking rabbits, like whatever. But I found it so interesting because it talks about like, well, how do rabbits think about the world? And like, there's a lot of stuff in there about how they don't understand what a road is. They know that they exist and they know that like they know about cars, but don't know what they are or how they work or what their motivation is. And having them talk about it and then also, how they use their myth stories to think about the world. So it's just interesting. I almost don't quite know. I just like all of it. I liked that it was looking at storytelling and how that matters to you, even though it's about how rabbit stories matter to rabbits. It was maybe the first exposure to that, to talking about myth and also talking about like the culture that is utilizing that for different reasons. And it talks about death and like the spirit of death and like how rabbits conceive of that.
Yeah. And actually, to me, that's part of the draw of some of these animal stories that we'll get into with like a couple of these other titles, I bet. But the place of death in the worlds of these animals is so much more prominent, like especially in this story, because it is trying to evoke a different time in human existence by not letting the animals like understand kind of modern tools and modern ways. Like you said, they don't know what a car is and stuff. They kind of have this more primitive mindset, and there's like still an element of magic in the world. And these stories are so much more valuable to them because it's kind of all they have to lean on for answers. And that sort of realization comes about you, I feel like, when you read this. So to me, that's like a big part of the story. And also, these places are real. Like Watership Down is a real spot in like Hampshire, England, or somewhere. And
I actually didn't know that.
It's like these. So I think something that's magical about all these is they're kind of taking place right below your nose, right? All these animal stories are happening. And if you just take a moment to like look around, you might glimpse one of them, which I feel like is exactly a thing a narrator would say at one of the productions of one of these stories.
Yeah.
If you just take a moment, you might glimpse.
Well, and it's funny you say that because I didn't know this until fairly recently, but I was rereading the book and looking it up, and the author was basically just telling a story to his children as they were driving around, and they like wanted him to tell them a story. And so he just started to make it up. And he's telling a story about rabbits because he's looking around at like, what can I tell us to? Okay, like rabbit, we're in the wilderness, the country of Britain, whatever. We'll talk about rabbits. And he's just running with it and telling a story. And which is kind of how I imagine a lot of myths develop in the first place. And it's just like, there's so many layers to that there. And one thing that we've debated off the air, it's not really debated, but sort of commiserated about, that we'll probably get into during the Watership Down episode. But the author claims that like the story doesn't mean anything. There's no greater meaning to it because he just sat down and wanted to tell a story to his daughters, and it was all just kind of off the cuff. And so there's no allegory, whatever, which I always am immediately like, yes, there is. And you might not even be aware of it. But like you telling the story, especially just drawing on like your gut instinct, whatever's coming to mind, is like a direct reflection of how you see the world and what you're thinking, like what occurs to you in the moment to talk about. So there's just so much for a storytelling nerd to get into there and to speculate about. And, why do we tell stories the way that we do? Like, what's the point of the story? Why did you include these things? It's just cool.
Yeah. And it's also maybe just, I might have said this in another episode, but it's maybe a symptom of the time and the way we talk about the work we do. Maybe there was just like the aura of like the behind the scenes of the story should stay there. That's why, therefore, it is not I will tell you nothing about where this story originates from. Where the director of Burrow she's very willing to like be open with where the story comes from. And I'm sure a great interviewer could dig more out of her. That's a rabbit joke. What is that, like an aggressively violent rabbit digging more out of her? But and anyway, she's like more revealing because I think that's what we expect from our creative people now. Whereas like at the time, Richard Adams in 1971 or 2 or whenever this book was published, and he's doing like the interview circuit, maybe it just wasn't in fashion to talk about your stories. That's probably why it reads so weird to us. You're like, no way is this disconnected from your experience. It just can't be.
But I do wonder
like
too,
what?
This is a whole greater topic, but I wonder if people genuinely just didn't think there was more to it than that. You know, kind of like how people used to think that going to therapy was this terrible, like horrible thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Like sometimes people just didn't want to reflect on stuff culturally. And I wonder if.
Yeah, they just would shut down.
Yeah, or just like, that's not something you talk about. I don't know. It's very interesting. That's a whole nother.
Boy, I don't know. I think you're probably exactly right. I think it is. We just don't know how to talk about. He didn't know how to talk about it, and therefore.
Yeah, I think there's something going on with Brad Bird and the Incredible stuff too. I think it's the same kind of thing. Like maybe there's just an unwillingness to engage. Anyway, speaking of engaging, what else you got? Okay,
let's engage on another. So now we're sitting in the kind of darker realm again. We've the cute little like watering cans of Peter Rabbit's World are collapsing in on us, and now we're in Rikki Tikki Tavi.
Heard of it?
Which is an old. Heard of it?
Seen it?
Great name. So I was particularly thinking about like the Chuck Jones. There'll definitely be some Chuck Jones talk on here further down the line.
Oh yeah.
But in '75, this was, I think it's about a 30-minute short he did based on the Rudyard Kipling story. So if you're not familiar with Rikki Tikki Tavi, here's the basic premise. It's we're at kind of turn of the century India, and there's a English family living in India, and they find a little mongoose. He's like washed up after a rainstorm. He's been separated from his family, and they adopt him. The little boy becomes very connected with him. So the mongoose, Rikki Tikki Tavi, feels responsible for the family, and he starts to meet the animals that live around the property. And of course, there are some angry cobras, Nag and Nagina.
Of course.
And they've got a bunch of eggs, and they decide they want to kill the family and take over the house, I believe. And Rikki Tikki Tavi is totally against that and fights them off in some awesome epic action scenes. And I listened to the audio book version of this again today, and it's a perfect action film. It's like you could see this being like a John Wick, like kind of vengeance type of story if you just twisted a couple of the beats. Because Rikki Tikki Tavi he's quite violent and angry, but he's also extremely adorable. Like can I read this little quote from the book? Because I feel like all these stories just have great like character descriptions, and we need to hear at least one of them.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so here's how, this is right from the beginning of Rudyard Kipling's Rikki Tikki Tavi. He was a mongoose, rather like a little cat in his fur and his tail, but quite like a weasel in his head and his habits. His eyes and the end of his restless nose were pink. He could scratch himself anywhere he pleased, with any leg, front or back, that he chose to use. But he could fluff up his tail till it looked like a bottle brush, and his war cry, as he scuttled through the long grass, was, "Rick, ticky, tick, tick, ch."
He sounds exactly like what I need. I don't know, do they get rats? Because if he could vibe with some rats, he could move right into my home.
Yeah, he fits right in that animal category of, like, he's extremely cute and charming, but he's still an animal. Like, let us not forget that. And those are like some of my favorite types of characters, like the ones that can't forego that instinctive nature. Like, you know, Wolverine from the X-Men has a little bit of that flavor, but I just love this character because his eyes glow red throughout the story. Like when he gets like defensive of his home, he like turns into a true animal. But then when he's with the kid, he's very loving and his tail's a little bottle brush.
Oh yeah, I love that. I love that he has a war cry. explicitly.
Yeah.
Like, that's very good. There's something that appeals to people about this too. Like, I certainly think the inclusion of him protecting a family is not, any mistake, but it's almost like what we love about our dogs. Like, they're so adorable. We love them so much. And theoretically, they would do anything to keep us from harm, that kind of thing. And it's like, that's why we consider them to be our best friends. Like, that's what we love in an animal.
Yeah, it really is that, because you're really rooting for Ricky Tikki Tavi, but you're also getting his point of view, and he describes it as a war. Like, this battle with the cobras is his war.
Yeah, which is kind of awesome.
Which is, these things are all products of their time. So
it's kind of taking like a dragon slaying story though, and then just condensing it down into the animal world.
Right. It's just shrinking it down, and which makes it feel really big, but it's just basically taking place on a front porch.
Yeah, that's real life. It's where all the real action happens.
And then if, look up, if you haven't seen the Chuck Jones version, it's essential Chuck Jones viewing. The character animation.
Yeah, if you're talking about him being cute in this too, he's got those iconic cheeks, like the Chuck Jones like cheeks that are just so like cherubic and puffy. And he's just like, here's this dead snake. Like, hi, did I do a good job? It's so cute.
Yeah, it's these stories to me are at their best. Well, Burrow doesn't have this, and I love it for what it is, but these older stories are at their best when there's a little bit of death in them, because that's, to erase that from the animal world is like to not be honest to your characters. Like, that they're all kind of tragic because us as humans, like they don't live as long as we do. So like all these rabbits and like mongooses and creatures we're meeting, they're so fleeting in a way. Like I feel like that was always something kind of sad with these. Like these creatures aren't going to be there our whole lives.
I also kind of wonder if that's what we latch on to animal stuff. I mean, it has to be so many reasons why we gravitate to animal stories, writing and telling them and consuming them. But like, I do wonder if it's an easy way to talk about hard things too. Like, like Watership Down. I mean, I guess it's a kid's book. Like, it was a story for kids, but there is a lot of death in that story. So much. Mm-hmm. And yeah, maybe it's just easier to kind of float that idea, hey, we're alive, but here's some hard truths about the world, but I'm going to kind of couch it in slightly cuter terms, slightly more detached, so you don't necessarily have to feel the full overwhelm of mortality.
Yeah, it's like a soft little packaging for like these ideas. And then to me, sometimes not the worst version of it, but like the next stage is to keep the packaging, but strip it of its story, which like, I'm not even going to pick a thing because my default is I would want to say like Pokemon is that, because it's like a product made to be sold. But I also know that Pokemon have backstories. But to me, it's almost reverse. It's like they made the thing first and then they imbued it with meaning after. So it's quite different. And I love Pokemon also. But it's just such a different way to deal with like the animal as the vessel.
And I want to say real quick aside about Pokemon, but the conception of Pokemon and the origin of it was from the guy that invented Pokemon loved to like catch bugs and look at bugs when he was a kid. And he was like, I loved that so much. I love to just like catch all these different kind of bugs and like look at them, that should be a game. So it's funny because that came from like a love of animals and kind of playing in the world, but it's not from a storytelling place. It was almost more of like a biological inspiration.
Yeah, it's just about like observing and like being curious and wandering around, which are all great things. Like, again, Pokemon is awesome for its own thing, but when you put it in the context of these animal stories, it's like, oh, what an interesting way to like tell a totally different type of story, but with equally cute
Yeah,
things.
Like they're not animals anymore. They're like, I don't know, mascot. There's something else. It's not natural.
Yeah, right. And you could even say Burrow is kind of like that in a way, because those are animals, but in name only. Like we were saying, the character designs are so loose. They're like identifiable as a rabbit or a mouse, but like just barely. Like they could almost easily be Pokemon forms.
Yeah, they're just a little bit more anthropomorphized, I think. You know, they're all walking upright, that kind of thing. It's the same, like Fantastic Mr. Fox uses that, and you do sort of get, like, this is really a story about people. They just have the veneer and the flavor of animals to great effect, I think. But it's not about, it's just like, you know, Watership Down, they're all like, we are animals in the world.
Yes.
This is actually a great segue into the Redwall conversation.
Yeah, let's do it.
For those who don't know, that's also one of the books in the Redwall series, but there's like a whole series. I mean, those books went on forever. There's got to be over 20 of them. And when I was a kid, they were the best thing. I loved them. It's been a minute since I've read any of them, but in a nutshell, they're kind of like this medieval, like a lot of sword play, you know, big war scenes sometimes like that, adventure series, and with anthropomorphic animals, and it's just the adventures they go on in their world. A lot of them focus around this abbey that exists somehow. And so why I say that was a good segue into it is because Redwall is, like, I almost didn't include it in this, but I think it should count, especially because it's so formative for me.
Yeah.
And the animal thing is just, it's in there. It's hard to talk about it because I don't know what it is. And even the author didn't seem to know. You can never quite tell, like, are there humans in this world somewhere? Are there not? Like, just what's going on? How big? I actually met the author. I got my book signed by the author at a bookstore when I was in like 8th grade or something.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And I explicitly asked him how big the animals were. And he said, they're as big as you want them to be. Which is like, honestly, the only reasonable answer he could give, but is a total non-answer.
Yeah.
Because there were, in the very first book, there's like a horse pulling a cart. And there's an entire army of rats in the back of this cart, and they're the bad guys. But so you immediately are like, okay, there's a horse. Rats are rat-sized, you know, proportionally, because one of them gets crushed under the wheel of the cart. Like, stuff like this is happening. And nothing like that ever happens again in the entire series. And it's very obvious to me that Brian Jakes, the author, wrote it initially thinking all of this is sort of happening underneath a human world, and then scrapped that idea. And it's like, it's just a fantasy world where the people are animals instead.
Yeah.
So he was just like, I'm not going to acknowledge it. But so it feels very amorphous. Like, things will happen in one book series, and then, you know, in the next book series, it's like a century later, and maybe there'll be a callback, or maybe that stuff never happened, like that kind of a deal. Everybody's using like arrows and swords, but there's also magic sometimes. There's this iconic like mouse warrior who was like in the first book, I believe, named Martin. And then he'll just kind of show up like as a ghost sort of in different series and like guide them. And I don't know, every few books, there's like a bunch of riddles where they have to like tear down walls in the abbey to like find the clues to like solve their current problem. And it's just, you're wondering like how many people, you know, put in all these secret clues when they were building this abbey. Like, how did this happen? So it does feel very like loosey-goosey in that way.
I guess with this sort of series, by making them animals, you're allowed to delve into different cultures and mythology from different places. And I don't know enough about Redwall to say that that's true. It feels very like Arthurian legend-ish in the way like you kind of described the fantasy stuff. But I'm sure it's probably pulling from other places in the world. And if they're, you know, rats and mice and stuff, then it doesn't really matter what part of the world they're coming
What's
from.
funny too is, and I think this is a very valid criticism of Redwall, but even as a kid, it upset me. But all of the evil characters are only a certain subset of animal races. And then all of the good characters are only ever like mice, squirrels, whatever. And bad guy, like a rat could not be good by the rules of Redwall. A rat was evil. And he even wrote a book explicitly addressing that ended up having a very distasteful message where this baby ferret, which is one of the evil, like vermin races, is abandoned and is picked up by the Abbey people. They raise him from a child. He turns out to be a little murderer. Like it's inbred in them. And even as a kid, I was like, that sucks. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I don't like it. But it was super interesting. And in a way, I guess that makes me think, you know, we're telling these stories and like, why are we doing that? Because even Lord of the Rings kind of has that issue where it's like the orcs are evil,
Yeah.
like dark people, blah, blah, blah. And, and then you look at it with an adult eye and you're like, oh my God, like, oh, that's not a good. But that's also just a limitation of the mindset of people in a certain era was just like, we're not breaking out of this. Because I believe Tolkien even acknowledged that at a certain point.
Yeah.
But you're not thinking about it. So then you're writing this stuff that is like, it's coming from a place inside of you and it comes out and it's not a good look. It's not good. And
right.
That it matters, like what you're saying as a storyteller. I get all of this is like me advocating for like, when you tell a story, you should actually care and you should think about it because you're saying things, even if you think you're not. And I don't know. I mean, I still think you can love Redwall and I still do. There were so many things about it that were formative. Otherwise, it was fun adventures. It was a great world to play in, which I think a lot of authors, are like, this is just a world to play in and like, don't think about it. But you should also think about it.
Yeah, because all that stuff seeps through, right? Like everybody's prejudice or like point of view or feelings. And sometimes it's for the sake of a story. You might like draw these lines between types of characters, but then it becomes harmful because what if we want to, like it just, like you're saying, it kind of paints a picture of the author for better or worse, no matter how playful you're being with, your world and your characters. You're always describing yourself through them.
Yeah, it's just a statement. And, I say dumb stuff a lot, but I try to pay attention to the things that I'm saying. And it's just a good reminder to always do that.
Yeah, if you're trying to grow, then that's the best you can do.
Lots of great stuff in there too, though. I mean, a lot of really cool, I don't know. A lot of fighting, a lot of killing. As a kid, I was just like, this is awesome. I want to be in the rabbit army, whatever.
So is it, is it gruesome description? Because in Rikki Tikki Tavi, it's not gruesome, but like you get the description of like the head of the cobra being cut off and whatnot.
Yeah, it totally can be. Sometimes characters would die in really bizarre ways. And sometimes, kind of contrary to what I was saying earlier, I guess there are hints of this throughout, but like there are snakes that show up sometimes and they'll definitely be like, this is basically a dragon. And, maybe a character gets bitten by the snake and then dies like because of the poison, that kind of stuff. There are a lot of dramatic, scenes where there's a big warfare thing happening. People are dying on the battlefield or, having these like overwrought dramatic stuff. Characters died left and right in those books. And I think it was in a way kind of good, I guess, as a kid, because that didn't bother me when I was reading that. It wasn't, you kind of get used to it.
Yeah, it's all like primer for like more like young adult adventures and like more adult reading, I guess.
Yeah, there's also a weird amount of slavery in Redwall. But it was always a bad thing, but it is weird in hindsight how frequently slavery came up, and it was always usually the bad guys, vermin, like kidnapping good Redwall people and like trying to sell them away on like pirate. Like there's a lot of pirate stuff too. So there would be whole books where it's just like there's a galley full of like row slaves all like chained to their oars type of a thing. There's a lot of weird stuff in those books. I gotta comb through those again. Brian Jakes went to a lot of strange places.
Yeah, I guess that's inevitable if you keep like iterating on the same world, which is like, we'll have to pick an episode to kind of get into that, how you sort of like spiral, beyond the sequel. A sequel is one thing, but like to build a series, that's like a totally different game.
Yeah.
So we'll have to find something to dig into that topic with.
I love that.
Shall we step out of beyond the red wall?
Yes, this is...
I don't know why I always have to transition in some way. Who cares? Next book.
I like to
Ready?
see you do it, though.
Yeah, it always works out perfectly.
It's very good. Very elegant.
So here's my third pick. I'm going really sentimental, and I'm going with The Velveteen Rabbit, or subtitle or alternate title, How Toys Become Real.
Tell me more.
So okay.
I'd love to know that.
This is a little recipe, a little black magic. So this story's from 1922. It's another British classic written by Marjorie Williams. And the original book, this thing has been redone in a million direct-to-video animated features, and find them in your local convenience store in 1995 with a big like discount sticker on it. But the original illustrations were done by William Nicholson. And this is basically the story of a cute little stuffed rabbit with a sawdust heart who was given to this little boy on Christmas. So it's got a real Nutcracker Sweet type of vibe early on. It's like just classic, like proper Christmas morning type of feel. And the kid gets all these cool mechanical toys and stuff, but then he gets the stuffed rabbit also, who's kind of the outlier. And in the toy room, all this conversation comes up of like, what does it mean to be real? So one of the characters poses this question, and here's just like a great little quote. So I picked this specifically because, you know, all these animals in these stories, they are not real. Spoiler alert. They're like little ideas wrapped in these animal packages. And I like this story because it kind of breaks down what it means to be endeared to like an animal character. So this one character says, what is real? And she further speculates on what's real and says, does real mean having things that buzz inside you and stick out like a handle? Which is to say like a little kid's teapot or like a wind-up toy or something advanced that is automated, because that's sort of like the new thing here in the 20s is, I guess, wind-up toys.
Little robots.
Yeah, little robots, basically. Are they real? Who knows? We'll see. Depends what year you're listening to this episode. And one of the older, I believe this is like, they call him the skin horse. He's like the elder statesman of the toy room. He says, real isn't how you were made. It's what happens when a child loves you, which is like such a common theme through right up through like Toy Story. Like Toy Story really is kind of am I real story in that same type of way. So now through the story, we get all these great story beats of the Velveteen Rabbit believing that it is real, but it is not quite. It's like that story beat of the character believes the lie it's being told or it's telling itself. So there's just this great little moment in the story where the boy declares his love for the rabbit to another kid who's like, your rabbit sucks. It's all like mangy and weird. It doesn't even have any structure to it. It's basically like a flour sack. And the little boy says, no, I love my rabbit. And that night, the little rabbit thinks to himself, he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred his little sawdust heart that it almost burst, which is just a perfect little line. But the realization there is that the rabbit is still not yet real. The rabbit has to go on to really serve the boy. The boy gets scarlet fever because this is the 20s. This is something that's going on.
Seems relatable.
Yeah, and the rabbit helps him through that. But then the rabbit is thrown out because he's, been here for all this sickness. And now he's just kind of like a dirty old toy. And he's out in the woods, and it seems like he's at his lowest point. And then he's found by a fairy who turns him into a real rabbit. And now he has like rabbit woodland friends and whatnot. And one day he goes back to see the boy one last time. But of course, the boy doesn't recognize him, other than he has the same spot pattern as his childhood toy rabbit. I don't know. I just always love this story. It's just, I don't know, kind of sad because you're reconnecting with someone who doesn't recognize you anymore. That's one of those story things that always got to me. And I just love the idea that he thought he was real, but he still had like a long way to go before he was. And maybe this is like my origin of love of rabbits in general.
Yeah, I totally see that. And it's a sad as hell story, really. Even just hearing you describe it right now, I'm just like... Something about, well, I guess, it's easy to remember. Like when I was a kid, I remember exactly the stuffed animals that I had that were my favorites. And one of them was actually a rabbit. And so it's easy to have that kind of tug on your heartstrings. That's, a Toy Story will do that. A Toy Story, not just the Toy Story. But
all Toy Stories.
Yeah, the genre of Toy Stories. And having them be there for you and then be taken away to be destroyed, like even just that idea kind of stings. And I don't know, I guess the magical element of the rabbit actually getting turned real is kind of a pivot in a way from like this very sort of dry, like life is sad and we are just like a room of worn out toys. But I like that melancholy visual at the end.
Yeah, he's like rewarded for his sacrifice. And I don't know, maybe you could look at it like becoming the real rabbit is like the afterlife for him, and he's able to like look back down on the boy who he was there for, because maybe that little toy rabbit died of, I don't know,
Scarlet fever.
contracted. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, I always like to point out the year in these stories because it truly does matter, especially when it's these times of like true illness. And you know, like this was a real thing, and kids were dying. And like Secret Garden, also a story I love, fits in this category too. Like the stakes are high for kids in some of these older stories. And I guess you could call them dark, but it's not because people were just wanted to be mean to kids. It's like, well, this was the world they were living in.
Yeah,
so, I don't know.
That does feel a lot more like we are literally just telling you a story that maybe could even help you because life is just hard.
Yeah, in the context, this could have been like a real inspirational story. Like, I don't know, it kind of is though, if you think of it like, oh, this is what happens when your toys go away. They turn real and they come back to check up on you. That's kind of cute.
Yeah, I think it's just nice to see the universality maybe of how we get attached to stuff.
Right, yeah.
Like that's such a human thing, and that like we genuinely do. Well, it's just funny too. We write all of these stories from the point of view of toys when really it's our point of view and it's how we feel about the toys. So like, yeah, we write Toy Story all about how our toys really care about us and want to get back to us. But really that's coming from the place of like when you were a kid and you lost the toy that you love and how it actually hurt.
Yeah.
And it actually felt bad. It's that. Like, I wonder, you know, if the boy wrote this story, if he would be like, really the ending is like, I was devastated when they took the rabbit away because he was there when I needed him. And so I'm imagining that he's gone on to live this life as a real rabbit because he deserved it. Because that's what I want, because I'm this traumatized boy.
Yeah, to me, that's the sort of question that should be coming up in like all these like early story room conversations about like the movie they're going to make. It's like, whose point of view is the right point of view for this story? Because like you're saying, the Velveteen Rabbit is different stories depending on like whose point of view you're seeing. And that's like a big deal. And it's also something, you know, maybe it obviously was probably never going to be the kids' story, I don't think, but maybe, I mean, maybe her editor was like, oh no, make it from the rabbit's point of view, because then you can kind of get at this idea.
Well, yeah, no way. I just think we do that because it's easier for us to process our feelings. But I think that's where these are coming from. I think that's why people write stories like this, is because we feel so strongly about it. Like, I love this thing that's not real so much, and I feel that feeling. So I'm going to fully make it real by writing a story about how it loves me.
Yeah.
It's like we genuinely give them life any way we can. In some ways, it's the only way to do it is to write a story from its point of view.
Right. And then that's like kind of, because we're still, you know, we're back in the world of Pixar in some way, but that's sort of what they pull off by giving you this character that lets you in, or you open yourself to it. And then it kind of like, those characters then have the opportunity to like break your heart or really like speak about something that you otherwise wouldn't be comfortable about. Yeah. Which is like why like, oh, I'm going to cry in a Pixar movie because they're going to get to me by like stealthily attacking through the guise of something cute.
It works every time. Kipple. Oh, yeah. My heart. Ouch.
Okay.
Okay, so I think that brings us to choice number 3 for me. And I'm going to take us home with kind of a softer landing with the classic Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. Although I also watched the cartoon, the movie of this, when I was a kid a lot. So they're kind of tangled up for me. No pun intended.
It's like a Hanna-Barbera cartoon, I think, or something.
Yeah. Weirdly, because I don't remember it having that aesthetic, but I mean, it has been a really long time, genuinely, since I've seen the cartoon. But I just remember like the whole smorgasbord sequence with Templeton the rat, iconic rat character. There's a lot of good stuff to unpack there. But I loved Charlotte's Web when I was a kid. I think it might have been the first book I ever did a book report over in my wee childhood times. It's accessible and it was cute and it has a good moral. It does kind of go back a little bit more to the Peter Rabbit. It doesn't have that vintage flavor quite as much. I guess this was written in the 50s, like the early 50s, but it doesn't quite harken all the way back to maybe like the 20s, I'm guessing Peter Rabbit was, something like that. I don't know.
1905.
Holy cow. Well, the 20s, 1905, same year. And it's about a little girl, and she basically saves the life of this pig because he was born too tiny, and her dad's gonna like slaughter it right then and there pretty much, and she's like, no, you can't, because I am sensitive and I love animals, aka Caitlin Cadieux, like fully relatable character. And they just raise him and then eventually save his life, I guess, by virtue of him being good marketing, I guess, really.
Yes, totally.
So that's like kind of it's a little bit weird trying to unpack what's going on here. At the end of the book, you have to still kind of reckon with the fact that it's not like the people have all gone vegan just because they decided not to eat Wilbur. But it's good enough for the moment. It also ends with this kind of nice sequence. So a charming part of the story is Wilbur the pig befriending Charlotte, who is a barn spider. And she ends up really saving his bacon. Pun. There's so many puns in this. I'm not doing it on purpose. That one was kind of on purpose. But she's breaking the fourth wall of reality, really, I guess, by writing actual human words in her web that are basically like, this pig is special. Don't eat this pig. He's really cool. Don't do it. They become sort of a local tourist sensation. People come to see, the pig that the spider is writing about. They take him to the fair at some point. Mm-hmm. That seems, I don't remember where that goes. But the end sequence is kind of nice because it turns out that Charlotte had a bunch of babies. And then they all kind of go and propagate on the wind and like spread out. And it's just kind of one of those stories where I guess that's good enough as a hopeful ending.
Yeah. I don't know. I like endings like that.
Yeah, well, it's like, because that's
where things dissipate into the wind.
Kind of what it's weird because it's a happy ending, although it is kind of sad for multiple ways. Again, Wilbur gets to live. That's not necessarily true for all farm animals. Always, farm animal stories are a little weird too, as a genre. Because I almost included Babe. I don't know if you ever saw movie, the classic feel-good movie Babe, which honestly, if you're having a shitty day, just watch Babe. You will not feel bad at the end of Babe. You will feel okay. Throw it on. Great movie. But it's really interesting that like barn movies with animal characters have to address the fact that they live to die a lot of the time. And that's just one of those, it's almost gutsy. Like, I feel like I wouldn't have written a story like this because I would be like, how do I make this work if I'm trying to make like a cute animal story, but I have to contend with the fact that you are a pig on a farm. Like, what am I going to do about this? I don't know. And Charlotte, even, spoiler alert for Charlotte's Web, Charlotte doesn't make it out of the book alive or the movie. She dies. And I think that's why finding this like egg sac that hatches at the end and like all of her children kind of flourish into the world is supposed to be this ray of hope. You kind of, even as a kid, I was really getting this mystique of Charlotte, and I was just like, she's just like a kind stranger. Like, she didn't have to do this, but she's one of those people that you hope you're lucky enough to encounter in your hour of need, who is going to be there to help you out. And maybe it's because she too is like not, as a spider, people aren't necessarily like, awesome, great, definitely not going to kill this animal. People kill spiders, and maybe she felt a kinship with Wilbur and decided, I'm going to throw my lot in with him. I'm going to like try and save his life. We're not so different, you and I.
Yeah, she's like the best of us, right? Like, she's the empathetic stranger. Like, she's the best of the human spirit. She like represents hopefulness.
Yeah, and I guess when you're supposed to kind of hope, all the baby Charlottes going out into the world, and you're like, they're out there, they're out there doing this, like being the everyday superhero kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just a cute story, though, at the end of the day. Like, yeah, there's some weirdness to it, but really it's kind of a story about like friendship, about loving stuff, like Fern just loving Wilbur. It's just a cute thing.
I shout out to Garth Williams, the original illustrator of this, and the way he illustrates like lettering, but as the cobweb stuff, not to go back to Spider-Man
But we
a
can.
couple weeks ago. But I always thought it was cool in Spider-Man when they would like do the titles with webbing or something. And I mean, I guess really that just goes back to Charlotte's Web is cool spider lettering.
Yeah, Garth Williams did it first.
Yeah,
Look it up.
1952.
I was really just going to say that there's a lot of good characters in this, and maybe that's what makes it so memorable, because they're maybe not terribly complex, but again, like Charlotte is the mysterious kind of good Samaritan who you just feel is very wise and sensible. I remember that little monologue in the book where she teaches him what salutations means. And as a kid, I was like, she's so smart. Like, that's so incredible. And then Templeton is just kind of the like, I'm a kind of a jerk and I'm like very self-absorbed, but like at the end of the day, I'm a good guy and I'm going to help y'all out, that kind of thing. And it's just a little bit timeless. And of course, Wilbur is just a little bit of the blank slate, but also like the naive, like well-meaning lad who like needs to learn a lesson about the world. It's good stuff.
And it fits in that. I think this one becomes notable in the same way the Miss Frisbee and the Rats of Nim becomes notable, in that it is about education and looking beyond like your condition. Literacy, it's about that too, like persuasion, like all these concepts, like things you should learn that a lot of people just don't, to their detriment. But I think that's why this book gets championed, because it's just like touching on all these important topics, but through these just great, rich, appealing characters, mostly animals.
I agree. I got nothing else for this. Well, let me ask you a question. And this could be a closing statement. Looking back on all the stories we just talked about, it's striking to me that they really don't have that much in common. So, what is an animal story? What is it? This is kind of how we opened the podcast, and now I'm sitting here really thinking about it, and I thought maybe we would come to some sort of unifying conclusion, but really it's just like, we just love putting animals and stuff. Why?
You want me to make up an answer?
Yeah, no, I do
have one.
I want you to solve this problem for me.
Okay, what makes an animal story? So I'm going to tie it to a story of my own.
That seems fair.
Okay, so a couple of years ago, I was working on this community art / book educational project called Creative Everyday, which was a collection of interviews I did with different creative people in upstate New York about what it was like to like truly do their creative job. Like, what's it like to be a local theater performer? What's it like to be a game designer?
Any option.
All the possible careers you could have. Like, what's it really like? And it was a book for kids to try to clarify basically what we're kind of doing with the show sometimes is like pulling back the curtain on like process and like talking about the struggle of it. So that was the book. And through making this book, a person I met knew a really influential kids book storyteller, Eric Carle. So I got to meet Eric Carle for the day. So for me and probably a lot of other people, he's kind of a quintessential animal kids storyteller person. And he's also really good at telling his story, which I'm sure over the years has been like whittled down to like the best, most interesting parts about himself. And an interesting thing about Eric Carle is he did not begin as the animal, the very hungry caterpillar, the brown bear, what do you see? He wasn't that guy when he started. He was a struggling art student in like war-torn Germany. He was a Mad Men graphic designer in New York City in the 60s.
Wow.
And yeah, it's crazy. He's like a Don Draper era dude. And his work is really awesome from that time. But at some point, somebody came to him and said, you know what you'd be great at is connecting with kids through your art and storytelling. And his first book is Brown Bear, What Do You See? Which is a story that was written by another author, and he just illustrated it. So I felt like that was him cutting his teeth on how he uses animals and creatures to like convey ideas and stories. And after that, you get like The Very Hungry Caterpillar. And when he was talking about coming up with that project and like how to center what it was about, he just, went back, like jumped back through his whole life to growing up in Syracuse, New York, which is actually not so far away from where we're recording this right now. And I didn't even realize he was from there. And
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's crazy. So he grew up in Syracuse, New York with German parents. And this was before they went back to Germany. So he came all the way back to this like early point in his life to tell stories from. And he focuses in like so finely on a caterpillar and a caterpillar's experience of like eating different objects. So to me, what's an animal story about? It's basically a point of reference or like a tiny opening for us to like connect with people through by like zooming in so close on something so small and mundane, like these creatures that live these short little brittle lives, but they're still like so appealing and draw our attention if we take the time to look at them. Like that's the opening for us to like connect with each other. And that was like kind of what I got from talking to him. Like when you want to tell stories, like a tiny little creature is a great way to like connect with the reader. So maybe that's why we always go back to them as storytellers.
Wow. And you thought we didn't have anything else insightful to say?
Well, yeah, I guess.
All right. Podcast's over. Cut now. Cut. So that's enough digging for one day. Join us next week as we kick off our next studio series. So we're doing a month-long look at the absolutely gorgeous 2D offerings from the Irish studio Cartoon Saloon, starting with Secret of Kells.
All right, so you can check out our episode archive and other information about Caitlin and I at cartoonfeelings.com. And also join us on Twitter and Instagram. Both of those you'll find at Feeling Cartoons.
Because we're feeling them. And if you are feeling them, we would love it if you would write to us with any thoughts, questions, episode ideas, etc. by emailing us at cartoonfeelingspodcast@gmail.com. We'd also love it if you are enjoying the show to rate us on Apple Podcasts or leave a review or both if you're feeling generous. Every little bit helps. And to share us with your friends. Get some good storytelling chat going in the group chat.
And yeah, that's all for now, folks. We'll see you next time.
Bye. You don't have to include that. It just felt appropriate in the moment.